Hello, everyone. This is Tucker again. I'm back to play some more Lee Chess. I just finally got my first stream up, and I think I'm gonna play a game. Okay, apparently he aborted. That's a sign. I'll do my basics episode real quick. So I've got a study for this already made because I think I mentioned this earlier that I cannot, I could not get that video to upload. I mean, and it was just poorly formatted, and so I had to take it twice, and I spent 2 hours to make this video, and it didn't work. So I'm just gonna go through the bare bones. I know Mr. Welch posted a video on Google Classroom, and it's the chess.com. It's International Master Wrench, I think. And so he goes over the opening principles very well. I just want to review. So first thing is control the center, and that is what, for instance, the move e4 does. Another good option is the move d4, but e4 is my choice, so I'll go over that. Uh, Let us see. So c5 is black's way of contesting the center. White has the e4 and the d5 squares, while black has c5 and d4. Now, white plays knight f3, saying, okay, well, we'll get these two squares, and black won't really have very many squares. And black says that white can't have these squares. This is just a sample opening, by the way. I don't want to try and say this is the only way this can go, or the best or worst way. I'm just showing an example of how a game could go in terms of center control. So white plays d4, trying to stake the claim that he can have this two-pawn center with e4 and d4, and that black just isn't good enough there. So black takes and white takes back. And now this is a line. Pushing e5 and taking space in the center is a line. And it's actually very good as well. This opening is called the, I believe it's the Kalashnikov Sicilian, but that's irrelevant. We're just here to go over lines in the Sicilian. So I just wanted to go over a few lines of the Sicilian defense that would show center control. And I know that wasn't the greatest example of center control, but for instance, I do want to show, here's the ideal setup. So say black played this move, and white got to play d4, because this is what white wants to do. If black plays a move that allows e4 and d4 to be played, as this one does, white should play e4, d4, and e4 if he gets the chance. So, say black just let white do what he wanted. I think that if white would just allow, if black would just allow white to do what he wanted, I think this is how the game would begin, or should begin at least. My Lee chess is disconnected. It won't let me make that move. Okay, so reconnecting. There we go. So I think this is how the game would go if black allowed white to just do what he wanted. It should reconnect. So this is kind of the ideal development and center control, which, by the way, development is our second key concept in the opening. You have to develop, you get all of these pieces. These are called the minor pieces, knights and bishops. You get all of your minor pieces into the game. You get your queen developed somewhere, either one of these squares in this position. And then, say black allows this and just keeps doing dumb stuff with his knight. White eventually gets this setup, and I would say if I had to make an ideal setup, although this position is completely ridiculous, this would never happen in a game, it's really illustrative of what white would want if white could get a perfect ideal opening and development. You connect your rooks, You put your rooks on the most open files there are. You put your bishops on good squares where they have, okay, that bishop is intoxicated. You put your bishops on good squares where they can attack weak points. You put the knights on good squares where they can later even maneuver to better squares. But and you get your queen active in the game somehow. You get your central pawns, and I'm not saying these are the only center pawns. If you can push f4 and c4 and get your bishops, say, over here, I don't know, whatever your taste is and where you want the bishops. But this is basically the ideal development scheme, and you can vary on this however you want. Obviously, you could have castled kingside and put your king over here, but this is the general idea. Now, the third concept, which I've already shown you here, is king safety. So, the most important thing in chess is king safety. If your king isn't safe, it doesn't matter if you have an extra queen, it doesn't matter. If your king is not safe, you will lose the game. You need to have a safe king. So getting castled, I would say in the first 10 moves, but preferably in, say, the first 7, you get castled. And it always depends on what opening you play, and various other factors determine when you can and can't castle. But castling certainly is a necessity in general. If you want to ever be successful in chess, you need to get your king safe. Now on to tactics. Tactics, so that was the opening, the first part of the game. There are 3 parts. So the second part is the middle game, and we divide the middle game into tactics and strategy, as we have here. So tactics are, for instance, let's show this. Tactics are just various ways that you can try and win your opponent's pieces or weaken their position or attack their king. So the first way that I want to show is the pin. So this is a pin. This is called a pin. White's bishop attacks black's knight, but black can't move the knight because if he did, he would be in check. You can't make a move that would put you in check. It's illegal. So this is a pin. Now this is what we call an absolute pin because he couldn't move the knight if he wanted to. If it were, say, the opposite side and we had a bishop here pinning a knight here to the queen, that's what we call a relative pin, because although it would be a bad decision to move the knight, you still could move it. So that's a pin. Let's go over our next tactical idea. Let's see about, how about if we could play 2 knight f6. Instead of black's normal move, knight c6 here, not that. Instead of black's normal move, knight c6, defending the e5 pawn, if black plays knight f6, white has some ideas, like this. Knight takes e5. Because black didn't defend, white can take this pawn. Now, black can also take white's pawn, but there's a catch. White has the advantage of going first. If white plays queen e2, now there's some tricks. And imagine black's knight was on c5 instead of e4. White's knight, if white's knight moves, you see that black is now in check because his knight moved. This is called a discovered check. So you can use this discovered check to win pieces. For instance, in this case, this is probably the most famous case of it, knight c6 check. Because it looks like, well, you're just putting a piece where it can be taken. Black can't take it because none of these get him out of check. He's in check still. So for black to get out of check, he either has to block with the knight, the queen, or the bishop. Those are his 3 moves. Those are his three moves. So say he plays queen e7, for instance. Black wins the queen. Say he plays knight e5. Black wins the queen. Or that's knight e6, but you know what I mean. And say he plays bishop e7. Black wins the queen. Black wins the queen regardless of what, or white wins the queen regardless of what black plays. So this is a discovered check, and it's extremely effective. We can use this in all sorts of scenarios. And it's one of the best tactics, the strongest tactics for winning a piece. So, our next tactic, let's see about... Oh, yes. So, let's see the fork. All right. Imagine you have this game. You have knight f3, knight f6, d4, which is a weird move, but it works. And white and black plays this. White plays his bishop to d3 to attack black's knight. It makes sense. Black moves his knight, so it's not being attacked anymore. It is still being attacked, but it's defended now. So black moves his knight to defend it, and white castles, for instance. Black can play this, e4, and now he's attacking two pieces at the same time with one move. So if you notice the recurring theme here, you have to set up the position so that you can accomplish more than one thing with only one move, because you only get one move at a time. So attacking two pieces at once, and this is called a fork, is the easiest and most visually simple way of doing this. Now, this technically wouldn't work. This particular fork wouldn't work because white has this, and it looks like this should be winning for white. But now, if, say, this bishop wasn't here, white has to play like this. And there's no way, now black is just winning. Black has an extra piece if this bishop wasn't here, for instance. So next, I want to show another example of forks. So we have, for instance, f6, e4, e5, knight f3, f6. So white can take here, and I'll show you why. If black captures back with the pawn, white can play this, which is, guess what? A fork. Black has to block the check, and white gets, guess what? Another fork. So he wins two pawns. He wins two pawns for... So if you notice, he wins two pawns and a rook in exchange for a knight. Because if you count, white has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. White has all his pawns, whereas black only has 6. White has 2 rooks. Black has 1 rook. White has 3 minor pieces. Black has 4. So white is winning here. White is for sure winning. In fact, this is probably the only way black has even a chance. And I would say he still doesn't really have a chance. So that is the fork. That is a fork. Let's also say... oh yes, so I will teach you the next tactic. I forgot what I was trying to do with this whole area here. But this is a common opening, actually. Up to this point, it's a common opening called the Berlin. And there have been apparently 1,800 games, which is a bunch, from this position. And so I'm just going to make a bunch of terrible moves for black. Do not take any of these as advice at all. I just wanted to lose all of black's pieces on purpose. So, okay, so here is an idea. If black plays this bad move, white can play this move. Oop, not that move, sorry. This move. Attacking black's king, but also looking at, if you can see, after black moves his king here, getting the rook behind the king. So black has to move his king, and white wins the rook. Notice, now imagine black plays another nothing move. White can do it again. He could even do it with this rook here. So he can play here. Now black has to move out of the way, say he moves here, and white gets the rook. This is called a skewer, when you attack a valuable piece or the king, and it has to move, so you get to take the piece behind it. This is not a very common tactic, but definitely something to watch out for in your games, whether it's you watching out for your own weakness or watching out for your opponent's. Now, I do want to show one last fork, and this is a way more common fork. So, say white plays bishop c4 here. That's called the Italian game. And black plays the second most common move, knight f6. White can play knight g5 here, the knight attack, which I play. It's an aggressive opening. And if black isn't careful, say he makes a nothing move, say he plays rook to b8, which doesn't do anything, white can play here. And if you notice this, white is attacking the queen and the rook. So black obviously can't take this knight because the bishop defends it. And if he moves, black has to move this queen or else he loses it. So he plays this, and so white gets the rook. And white's winning now. White's up what we call an exchange. The difference between a knight and a rook is what we call an exchange. So white is up an exchange in this case. And he's winning. He should win from here. So these are all examples of tactics. That was another fork, by the way. These are all examples of tactics that can happen. And tactics, as a beginner, are the first and most important things you need to learn about chess. If you can solve tactics, you can improve at chess for sure. Now, it takes time. It certainly takes time because, for instance, here, if I were black from this position, I would play queen e7. Actually, I wouldn't play queen e7. I would play... Well, I mean, if I were black from this position, sorry, I would play bishop c5. And then if you took f7, well, what's wrong with this? What am I doing wrong here? Oh, I see. No, actually, I don't see. Oh, you play d5 in this position. That's where I was messing up. Yeah, you play d5 here. But if you get tactics down, that's what I was trying to say. If you get an understanding for tactics and you can play tactics that will win you the game, like these tactics will. As long as you learn to watch out for these tactics in your game, you will break 1,000 points easy. 1,000 rating, I mean, on just tactics alone. And that's great. 1,000, you are a better chess player than most of the people in the world. So that's all for tactics. Next, we're going to move on to strategy, and I'm actually only at 19 minutes, so not bad at all, actually. So we are actually not going to cover strategy in this video, but that is the other main part of the endgame. So All of these variations, by the way, in case you want to go back and look and study any of these, all of these variations are available in a Lichess study under my profile, which is right here, TukTuk24. I'll show off my ratings. I'm 1650 classical, which I'm very proud of. I'm going to be 2000 by the end of the year is my goal. So now I want to go over endgames. So the endgame is, this is the endgame. I forgot this move, queen d7 was in here. But this is, I just want to show off what an endgame is. So we like to think about chess a lot as a battle game, a military game, where both sides are armies. In the opening, the first part of the game, white and black are stationing their armies for the battle that's about to happen. In the middle game, the players position their soldiers and then they start firing. The firing is going to be your tactics. The positioning is the strategy. So the firing is the tactics. The end game is when you have two soldiers standing and firing at each other, or you have one soldier trying to crawl away while the other has to prove that his side won the battle. That would be the end game. The end game is when there's very few pieces left on the board, and you have to either accept that it's a draw and that neither of you came out the winner, or one of you has to prove that you have a better position, that you won the game. So I just want to show how you could get to an end game. And almost every game has an end game. I just want to show I would say the most common end game, the single most common end game in chess. So this is called the Berlin variation of the Ruy-Lopez, which you don't need to know just yet, but it's not a bad thing to know, per se. So this is an endgame. We've traded off the queens, we've traded off a set of minor pieces. We each have 3 minor pieces, 2 rooks, and 7 pawns. Now, you can argue for days about whose position is better between white and black in this position, but really, all I want to show is a few ways that you can win or lose an endgame. So here is the endgame where you are up a queen as white. So if you're up a queen, what you have to do is trap your opponent's king. So you play a move like this or this. You want to get your opponent's king, as close to the edge as you can and make him stay there, because notice that if the queen is here, he can't move into check. He can't go here or here or here. He has to just walk around, and he can't do anything else. So you can bring your king into the game, and eventually, if your kings will have to line up like this. This is called opposition, because the white king can't move into any of these 3 squares, and neither can the black king. They can only move sideways or back. So if the white queen comes to this square, the black king can't move forwards in any of these directions, and he can't move sideways because it would still be check. So he must move back. Now if the white king goes to this square, for instance, the black king has to move here. The white king moves here. The black king has to move here. Now, as you can see from these over here, these moves, it says that queen to h8 is checkmate, which is true. Queen to e7 is checkmate, and queen to g8 is checkmate. There are 3 checkmates here, which I think is funny. But this is the main one if you have a queen, because this shows this doesn't have to be a king. There could be a knight right here, or you could have a rook over here, or a bishop here. It's just you have to have some piece supporting the queen, and the queen pushing the king up against the edge of the board. Because if you look at this from Black's point of view, he can't move to any of these squares, and he can't take the queen because it's defended. So it's checkmate. Unless he has some other piece that could take the queen, then it's checkmate. It's always checkmate if you can put your queen up against the black king up at the edge of the board. So with that being said, that is how you checkmate with a queen and a king, with only a queen and a king. Here's the next game. So this is a 2 rooks versus a king endgame. Now this is what we call the rook roller checkmate, because you roll your rooks down the board, and as you can see, we have Black's king can never come here, just as it would with a queen endgame, and Black's king can never come here. Obviously, if it can't get through this line, it can't come into this one. So Black's king must just keep retreating, and there's no way for him to stay behind, or to stay away from these 2 rooks checkmating him. I'm sorry. But now if he is in this box and you can put a rook here, it cuts off this entire line, and it cuts off this entire line. He has nowhere he can possibly go. So there was your 2 rooks checkmate. Heck, 2650. I'm making good time with this video. This took me an hour earlier. So now I want to go to checkmate with 1 rook, because it's a little trickier. And I hope that this isn't something you have to do. I mean, I hope you get up a rook. I absolutely hope all your games end with you up a rook. But it's tricky. It's really tricky to checkmate when you're up 1 rook. So I'm going to show you that pattern, and there are other patterns that you will have to learn eventually if you want to keep progressing in chess. But for the moment, I would say these 3 are your fundamental 3 endgames that you will need to know in order to progress in chess. If my Lichess would allow me to... Okay, there we go. Now we have... So let's go to chapter 7. Here is the 1 rook endgame. As you can see, it's just like the 1 queen endgame, where Black's king can do nothing but walk around, while White's king can come in and corner him. So this is what happens. The kings just walk around until eventually you have to... Sometimes the same as the queen. Remember when we put the queen here and it would be checkmate? It still would if this were a queen, but it wouldn't now that this is a rook, see, because Black can just play, say, over here, and there's no checkmate. I mean, there's a checkmate eventually, but it's not for 9 more moves. So what we want to do is force Black to line his king up with our king so that these 3 squares for him he can't move to. So because this will never line up the kings, because eventually Black will just take White's rook, or they'll just keep moving like this forever. Eventually, what you have to do is this. Move your rook 1 space so that now Black has to move so that the kings are in opposition. He can't move to any of these 3 squares because of the king, and he can't move to any square that he is on because of the rook. It's checkmate. So those were just a few simple mating patterns. So I'll review now. So to review, we went over pins, where a piece can't move because there's another piece behind it. Forks, where a single piece, such as a pawn, a queen, or a knight, attacks two other pieces at the same time. That's a fork. Skewers, where a piece attacks a king or a queen, and the king or queen has to move, so you win the piece behind that king or queen. Let's see. Pins, forks, skewers, and discovered checks were the other one we went into, where a piece moving doesn't put the king in check, but the piece that was behind that piece puts the king in check. So the piece you moved can take another piece, such as taking the queen like we saw here. Knight of 3. Come on. Well, you remember that line, don't you? Knight of 3, e4, e4, e4. Can we go to e4, e5, knight of 3? Can we go to knight f6? Like we saw in this line earlier, that's what I was trying to show. It won't let me pull it up. Knight f6, knight takes e4, queen e2. Say knight c5 is played, then you get this discovered check. Note that this has never been played in a master game, no game found, because no masters have ever fallen into this trap, because they lose the queen. So, we went over those tactics. We went over the basic principles of the opening. The opening principles being control the center, develop your pieces, and keep your king safe. We went over some basic endgames. We went over how to checkmate with one queen, how to checkmate with two rooks, and how to checkmate with one rook. So that'll be it. I do want to keep that poll going. I am going to add the London system as an option, as something that I do want to teach. So if you would like to see a series on either the Spanish game, the Italian game, the London system, the French defense, the Sicilian defense, the Grunfeld defense, or the Semislav defense, I will do any of those series. Just let me know in the comments which you would like to see, or tell me in person if you're able to, or send me a message on LeChess at TukTuk24. That'll be it. Thanks, guys.